So, I'm back with another D&D world building explanation video. I'm not sure what I'm actually going to call these yet, and I'm not sure what to call the series or the channel, so any input from you would go a long way. I read all the comments, so that should be fine. On screen throughout this video there will be a couple diagrams which are helpful for the explanation, but not necessary. You can watch this without watching the diagrams. So, let's begin. Last video I explained that I wanted the world to be a donut shape, and I explained the basic principle of how the sun worked. The sun is more of a tiny sphere in the center of the planet, and therefore doesn't have the normal orbits, therefore no seasons, no normal day-night cycles. The sun sets and rises in the same place, and in fact, I'll pull up a diagram. So, on screen you should see this strange diamond shape, and this is actually a cross-section of the donut-shaped planet, Surat, from the side. The sun bobs up and down along the line in the center, and there's some areas, as indicated by the dotted line, as the sun would never set here. Then there's the solid black line, which is the sun is never rising here. This is because the sun only goes up a certain amount and then down a certain amount. The very top and bottom of the torus, the donut, is at a 45-degree angle to the sun. It's a whole bunch of technical stuff, but basically it bobs up and down in the center. And for the world map, I've decided that there is one smaller continent around 6,000 kilometers. Nope. Sorry, yes, 6,000 kilometers across on one side, and it has one edge just beyond the sunless circle, and it is not touching the never setting on the bottom, so it's a pretty normal sort of thing. But this is where the campaign is started. The continent is called the Empire because it has been taken over by the Ashta, the Great Leader. This Great Ashta has ruled for hundreds of years and effectively rewritten history to say that he is the only ruler and will only ever be the ruler. And on the clock side, because it's a donut, I don't use north, east, south, west because there's no... This is very complicated stuff with the electromagnetic fields and so on, which I don't really want to go into and haven't really studied enough to understand, so I just use clock face, anti-clock face, sunward and sunless. So often you'll find on maps it would go sunless, clock face, sunward, and then anti-clock face. So effectively the compass has those four directions instead of north, east, south, west. Anyway, side tangent. This 45-degree angle changes a lot of things, and I will pull up another diagram. In fact, it's a set of 3 different diagrams. I'm now flipping to it in my actual handbook, which I have made for myself. This is how the houses would look like, or at least in my opinion, and since I'm the DM this is the fact. Because the sun only rises 45 degrees in the sky, the sun must be really important to people. It rises and sets in the same place, and therefore it's very dark, and effectively gets darker for longer the further away from the center you are. The UTR, which is on the clock face of the Empire, is at the 45-degree mark. It's at the very top of Surat, and therefore the sun only rises 45 degrees. This is where the story is set, and I wanted to think of traditional housing. How does this impact it? Because one side of the house would always be black and cold and dark, and it's a waste of firewood and pretty much everything to try and heat that house, make it light, make it livable. So diagonal houses. I was inspired by various older traditional houses, Indonesian houses, and various like earth brick houses and so on, and also wooden houses, thatched houses and so on. I took a lot of inspirations from pretty much everywhere I could think of and came up with this design. Everything is at a 45-degree angle and has a whole bunch of steps in it. The bed is often at the very back, and one important point is that the auger or cooking stove has a funneled chimney. This is very important because then the heat, the warm air, is then funneled up and then snakes its way along the floorboards of the second floor. This is built into the ground, so it's also very insulated. This keeps the houses warm because there's no seasons. It will pretty much always be autumn or winter. So there will also be left a ditch in front of the house, one where they've dug everything out, but also because they need a way to get in. This is often where they keep boxes and stuff, and often also food in locked containers, so that it stays cool and fresh for longer. Again, light is very important. How do we keep light everywhere in the house? You don't really want walls. Walls prevent a lot of light. So, between most walls you get very thin paper sheets, kind of like Japanese. I know this is all very random and probably not culturally accurate in any way. This is just where I took inspirations from. So thin paper walls, but for private things like the bedroom, you can often, or places where you change and things like that, you will often find thick black woolen curtains. These absorb a lot of heat but also block out all light, so you can find those between doors mainly so that you can go through them. And yeah, that's quite a large amount, but there's the bottom floor and top floor and there's not enough space for stairs, so we use a bridge in front of the house. You may have heard me mention the front bridge of the house. There's often houses get very long. They cannot get taller because that blocks more sunlight. They're very long and will have multiple bridges across. There's no hallways because that's almost pointless. So that's the old traditional houses, but since then I thought that's kind of cool, I like that, but I also want a reason why I can't use normal earthly architecture. So that means I need a new way of using the sun. I don't want to change the sun because this is very cool, and I made a new system. Around the sun are two pillars. These pillars are 5,000 kilometers long. They are ridiculously tall. We will go into that later as well, another video on, this will be on deities and essences as they are called here. But these pillars also have a strong metal core, a superconductor, which then heats the center of the planet. There you go, molten core of the planet. Great explanation, very fantasy-like. But what about the dwarves? They live under the ground. So eventually the dwarves found this metal core, pulled out some of the metal, and built towers up to the Earth's surface. So whenever the sun got closer to these two pillars, the conductors would start to heat up and glow, and they would effectively, the dwarves could build their own suns. This is how, in the frozen wastelands, some peoples can still survive. There's very few of them, but some dwarven people groups, some tribes of dwarves do exist there. And in big cities, you will get mages and dwarven societies powerful enough to dig down and build one of these for your cities. And they found that having the light source move around for each city will be different. Sometimes it spins in circles above them, sometimes it rises and sets like on Earth. They like having the light move around because it means that different areas at different times will be affected differently. Change is all important. And therefore, you get normal houses with roofs and windows on all sides and normal architecture. But olden towns, again, if the sun has only just risen, that means shadows are longer. This is a fact, we can't really disprove this, but it means that if you have a house, the shadow will be almost infinitely long. It will be kind of ridiculous. So what they do is they try and spread houses apart as much as possible, north and south, or sunward and sunless direction wise, so that these elongated shadows don't overlap with the houses, or at least they do this as much as possible, which means you often get very stripy looking towns. It's quite a strange phenomenon, but everything is proven and makes sense, and this is the whole point of the cheesecake principle, which is what I explained in the previous video. If you want to understand why I call it the cheesecake principle, just watch that video. I will have a link on it at the end of this video and probably in the iCard as well, if I can remember. Now, for the next thing, what about farms and plants? Because plants all rely on the sun. Or do they? I already explained that magic comes from beauty, and what's more beautiful than flowers? Probably a lot of things, but flowers are still beautiful. And some of these flowers have the magical ability to create energy. How? Well, for them, magic is the way that they photosynthesize, but there's also mechanical versions of this, where you will get flowers which, because of the magic they own, will rotate and therefore effectively be a dynamo. A magical dynamo. Wind-powered plants, basically a lot of mechanical, strange fantasy plants exist because of this. Also, another side fact, canopies of trees will always be slanted. And if you get a pine tree sort of thing, it will almost always shed its needles or its leaves on one side and grow them thicker on the other side, just because the sun rises there. So you'll pretty much never lose direction of where the sun rises and sets, because all plants will show this. Now, how do you grow crops? Either you can just have a normal flat field, or you could try and elevate it at an angle so that the sun hits it more directly. This requires a lot more effort at the beginning, but it means over time it will be a lot more productive because all the plants always get sun. But this only works with shorter crops and so on, and you get a lot of dirt. Where do you get the dirt from? If you dig a ditch behind it, you can then start growing some of these dark plants, these night plants, and that is also really interesting. And now we go on to how do humans interact with this. So humans, like all humans, often get into fights. You could just have a small town rivalry that your players encounter where, I don't know, one group of farmers is having a fight, like a slow burning fight with another group of farmers because one of them is slanting all their fields and the other ones like to grow it flat like the earth is supposed to be, and there's this constant battle, and that could be quite interesting. In fact, this could go even larger and larger and be the inciting incident for a war if we wanted to. Either way, I think I've almost exhausted all the things, or at least all the simple things, that happen when the sun only rises halfway. And yeah. Oh, and my final note, which I think some of you might enjoy, is that the leaves, all leaves are slightly transparent, so that the ground can also receive some sunlight. This means that it'll never be pitch black in a forest just because they have a thick canopy. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment, tell me what you want to name this channel or name this video series. I have some ideas, but if you have some, please tell me them as well. I always watch and reply to all comments. So, Goodbye.